Have you ever been treated like you are invisible? Like your presence meant nothing, your voice carried no weight, and your dignity was something others could trample on without consequence? This is the story of a man who wore silence like armor, who endured mockery with grace, and who carried a secret so powerful that when it was finally revealed, it shattered every assumption, every laugh, and every cruel word spoken against him. What you are about to hear is not just a story about revenge. It's about the quiet strength that waits, watches, and when the moment is right, rises in a way no one could have ever predicted. Stay with me, because by the end of this tale, you'll understand why the loudest voices in the room are often the emptiest, and why the silent ones are the most dangerous. In the heart of Lagos, where glass towers kissed the sky and wealth flowed like the mighty Niger River, there lived a man named Chukwuma. To the world that rushed past him daily, he was nothing more than a driver, a man in simple trousers and a pressed white shirt, standing beside a gleaming black SUV, waiting. Always waiting. But if you looked closely, truly looked, you would see something the world had chosen to ignore. His shoulders never slouched. His eyes, though quiet, missed nothing. His shoes, though inexpensive, were always polished to a shine. His hands, though calloused from years of labor, moved with a precision that spoke of discipline and pride. Chukwuma had learned long ago that the world judges you by what you wear, what you drive, and who acknowledges your presence. In Lagos, where status was currency and appearance was everything, he had become a ghost, seen but not noticed, present but not valued. Yet beneath that calm exterior, behind those patient eyes, lay a history that no one cared to ask about, a past that no one bothered to uncover, and a dignity that no amount of mockery could truly erase. Every morning, before the sun fully emerged from its slumber, Chukwuma arrived at the estate of Madam Ifeoma Okafor. The mansion stood like a monument to excess. White pillars, marble floors, fountains that danced to no music but vanity itself. He would park the SUV under the portico, check the fuel gauge, wipe down the leather seats, and adjust the air conditioning to exactly 22 degrees Celsius. Not 21, not 23, exactly 22. Because Madame Ifeoma demanded perfection, even in things she barely noticed. And then he would wait. Sometimes he waited 5 minutes, sometimes 30. Once he waited an hour and 17 minutes while she finished a phone call about a handbag she simply had to have before her rival, Mrs. Chidima, could get her hands on it. Chukwuma never complained. He never checked his watch impatiently or sighed in frustration. He simply stood, hands clasped behind him, watching the world wake up around him, the gateman sweeping the driveway, the housekeeper shaking out rugs, the gardener trimming hedges into shapes that pleased no one but Madame Ifeoma. When she finally emerged each morning, it was always the same. The sharp click of her designer heels across marble, the rustle of expensive fabric, the cloud of perfume that arrived 3 seconds before she did, announcing her presence like a trumpet blast. She never greeted him, never said "Good morning, Chukwuma," or "Thank you for waiting." She simply appeared, sunglasses already in place despite the early hour, phone pressed to her ear, already deep in conversation about things that mattered only to people like her. "You're late," even when she was the one who had delayed. "The car better be spotless. I have important people to meet today and I cannot afford to look anything less than perfect." Chukwuma opened the door for her, waiting until she settled into the back seat, arranged her designer bag beside her, and waved her hand dismissively, the signal that he could finally close the door and take his place behind the wheel. as he drove through the congested streets of Lagos, navigating between yellow buses, Okada riders, and hawkers selling everything from phone chargers to roasted plantains. Ifeoma's voice filled the car like smoke, thick and suffocating. Can you believe Adaza thought she could wear Gucci to my event last month? Gucci? As if she doesn't know I only wear custom pieces now. The woman has no class, I swear. And did you see her driver? The man looked like he crawled out of a gutter. Not like mine. At least you know how to keep yourself clean, even if you'll never be more than, well, you know what you are. Chukwuma's hands remained steady on the wheel. His face showed nothing, but behind his eyes, something flickered. Not anger, not resentment, but something quieter. Something that had been building for months, perhaps years. Something that waited. The car pulled up to a towering office building in Victoria Island. Before Chukwuma could step out to open her door, Ifeoma was already pushing it open herself, too impatient to wait for his service. She stepped onto the pavement, adjusted her sunglasses, and looked back at him with the expression one might give a piece of furniture. Wait here. Don't wander off. And for God's sake, don't embarrass me by talking to anyone. Just be invisible. That's what you're good at, isn't it? She disappeared into the building, leaving Chukwuma alone with the car, the Lagos heat, and his thoughts. He watched her go, watched the doorman bow slightly as she passed, watched the security guard straighten his posture. They saw her, they acknowledged her power. And him? He was already forgotten, erased from memory the moment she turned her back. But Chukwuma didn't mind being invisible. Not anymore. Because invisible men see everything. And what he had seen, what he had quietly observed during all those hours of waiting, all those days of being treated like furniture, all those moments of mockery and dismissal, it had taught him something valuable. The higher people climb, the harder they fall. And sometimes the fall begins with a single invitation. The afternoon sun hung heavy over Lagos, turning the city into a furnace. Inside the air-conditioned luxury boutique on Admiralty Way, Ifeoma sat like a queen holding court, surrounded by her closest companions, Adaize and Amara. These three women formed what they called the Trinity of Excellence, though others whispered different names behind their backs: the Trio of Trouble, the Council of Cruelty, the Ministry of Mockery. They met twice a week, sometimes to shop, sometimes to gossip, but always to remind themselves and each other that they were better than everyone else. Today's gathering had a special purpose. Ifeoma's birthday was approaching, not just any birthday, but her 45th, which she had been telling everyone was actually her 39th. The party would be the social event of the season, held at her mansion, with a guest list that read like a directory of Lagos's elite: oil magnates, senators' wives, Nollywood celebrities, successful businessmen, and everyone who mattered in their circle of influence and affluence. Darling, you simply must hire the caterer who did Justice Adewale's retirement party. The small chops were absolutely divine. People talked about those puff-puff bites for months, Adaize said, holding a scarlet dress against her body and examining herself in the full-length mirror. Amara laughed, her gold bracelets jangling as she gestured dramatically. Please, the real question is, who are you inviting? Because if you invite the wrong people, the whole atmosphere will be ruined. Remember what happened at Chidima's event last year? She invited her husband's cousin, and the woman showed up wearing Ankara like it was a village wedding. The embarrassment. The three women erupted in laughter, their voices bouncing off the boutique's mirrored walls. Outside, visible through the plate glass window, Chukwuma stood beside the SUV. The boutique manager had made it clear that drivers were not allowed inside. They disrupted the shopping experience for valued customers. So, Chukwuma waited in the heat, occasionally shifting his weight from one foot to another, his white shirt beginning to show small circles of dampness under the arms, despite his best efforts. Inside, Ifeoma was now standing before a three-way mirror, examining an emerald green dress that cost more than Chukwuma's yearly salary. She tilted her head, considering, then suddenly her face broke into a mischievous smile, the kind of smile that preceded her cruelest ideas. "Ladies," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow managed to carry through the entire boutique, "I just had the most brilliant idea. You know how we were talking about making this party truly memorable, something people will talk about for years?" Adaize leaned forward, interested. "Tell us everything." Ifeoma's smile widened. What if we invited someone completely unexpected, someone so out of place that their mere presence would be the entertainment? Amara's eyes sparkled with understanding. "Oh, you wicked woman, who are you thinking?" "My driver," Ifeoma announced, savoring each word like expensive wine. "Can you imagine Chukwuma standing there in my garden, surrounded by senators and oil barons and fashion designers, trying to make conversation, trying to fit in? It would be absolutely hilarious." There was a moment of stunned silence, and then all three women burst into laughter so loud that other shoppers turned to stare. Adaize had to grip the clothing rack to steady herself. Amara wiped tears from the corners of her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. "Ifeoma, you are too much," Adaize gasped between giggles. "The poor man wouldn't know which fork to use. Can you picture him trying to discuss business with Chief Okoronko or attempting to dance when the DJ plays something sophisticated?" "That's exactly the point," Ifeoma said, examining her nails with satisfaction. "Everyone needs entertainment at a party. I'll be providing live comedy, except the comedian won't even know he's performing. Oh, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect." Amara's expression turned thoughtful, a sly smile playing at her lips. "You know what would make it even better? If you made a big show of the invitation. Don't just tell him casually. Make it seem like you are doing him this tremendous honor. Build it up so much that he actually believes he belongs there. The contrast between his expectations and reality will make the humiliation so much sweeter." "Genius," Ifeoma breathed. "Absolute genius. I'll invite him today, very formally, very seriously. I'll make him think I am recognizing his years of service or some such nonsense. Oh, I cannot wait to see his face when he realizes what's really happening." The three women continued their planning, their voices rising and falling in waves of excitement and malice. They discussed every detail, how they would introduce him to guests, what questions they would ask him to expose his ignorance, how they would ensure maximum embarrassment without making it seem deliberate. It was cruelty disguised as inclusion, mockery wrapped in the illusion of kindness. An hour later, loaded with shopping bags and still giggling about their plan, the three women emerged from the boutique. Chukwuma immediately straightened, opened the car doors, and began loading their purchases into the trunk with practiced efficiency. None of them thanked him. Ifeoma barely glanced in his direction as she slid into the back seat, already on her phone, already moving on to the next scheme, the next purchase, the next opportunity to assert her superiority. The drive back to the estate took 40 minutes through Lagos traffic. Adaize and Amara filled the car with their chatter about guest lists, dress designers, and the latest society gossip. Chukwuma drove in silence, his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. He had learned to tune out their conversations, to let their words wash over him like rain on glass, present but not penetrating. When they finally arrived at Ifeoma's mansion, Chukwuma helped unload the shopping bags, carrying them to the foyer, where the housekeeper would distribute them to appropriate rooms. As he turned to leave, Ifeoma's voice stopped him. "Chukwuma, wait." He turned back, his face neutral, expectant. Ifeoma stood in the doorway of her sitting room, backlit by the afternoon sun streaming through expensive curtains. For a moment, she looked almost regal, almost dignified. Then her voice spoke, and the illusion shattered. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice taking on an exaggerated tone of generosity that made Adaize and Amara exchange knowing glances. "You know how you've been driving for me for how long now? 3 years? 4? 3 years and 7 months, madam," Chukwuma replied quietly.
Yes, well, quite a while. And while you're just a driver, I suppose you've been adequate. Not exceptional, mind you, but adequate. And because I am a generous woman, despite what some people might say, I've decided to extend you a very special invitation." She paused, letting the moment stretch, enjoying the power of keeping him waiting. Adaize covered her mouth with her hand, trying not to laugh too soon. Amara examined her nails, her shoulders shaking slightly with suppressed mirth. "My birthday is in 2 weeks," Ifeoma continued, her voice dripping with false warmth. "It will be a grand affair, the kind of event you've probably seen on television. Senators, business moguls, celebrities, the cream of Lagos society. And I've decided that you should attend as my guest." Chukwuma's expression didn't change. He simply looked at her, his dark eyes steady, unreadable. The silence stretched for several seconds. "Well, you understand what I'm saying, don't you?" Ifeoma pressed, a slight edge creeping into her voice. She had expected surprise, gratitude, perhaps even tears of joy. His silence unsettled her. "I am inviting you to my birthday party as a guest, not as staff. You'll mingle with the other guests, enjoy the food, experience how the other half lives. This is a tremendous honor, you know." "I understand, madam," Chukwuma finally said, his voice as calm and measured as always. "Thank you for the invitation." "Well," Ifeoma demanded, frustrated by his lack of reaction. He actually believes he's being honored. "Will you come?" For the first time since she'd known him, Chukwuma smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a slight upturn of his lips, but something in it made Ifeoma's confidence waver for just a moment. There was something in that smile, not quite amusement, not quite irony, but something that suggested he understood far more than she realized. "Yes, madam," he said quietly, "I will attend your party. Thank you for thinking of me." And with that, he turned and walked out of the house, leaving the 3 women staring after him. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Adaize burst out laughing. "Did you see his face? He actually thinks he's being honored." "This is going to be even better than we thought," Amara added, clapping her hands together. "Oh, Ifeoma, you've outdone yourself. The entertainment alone will be worth the cost of the entire party." But Ifeoma didn't join in their laughter immediately. She stood in the doorway, watching through the window as Chukwuma walked to his small motorcycle parked near the service entrance. There had been something in his smile, something in his calm acceptance that didn't fit with what she had expected. For just a moment, the tiniest fraction of a second, she felt as though he was the one in control of the situation, not her. Then she shook her head, dismissing the feeling. What could a mere driver possibly know about control, about power, about navigating the social waters of Lagos's elite? He was nothing, a nobody, a man who would soon provide her and her friends with the evening's finest entertainment through his own ignorance and inadequacy. "Come," she said to her friends, her confidence restored. "Let's plan the menu. I want everything to be perfect for our special guest." Their laughter followed Chukwuma all the way to the gate, carried on the evening breeze
like poisoned music. But if it bothered him, his face showed nothing. He simply mounted his motorcycle, started the engine, and rode away into the Lagos evening, his expression unchanged, his thoughts his own. The game had been set. The pieces were moving into place, and while Ifeoma believed she was the master player, carefully arranging a humiliation that would entertain her friends and reinforce her superiority, she had no idea that the quiet man she had invited as a joke was about to teach her and everyone else that silence is not weakness, patience is not surrender, and the people you overlook are often the ones who see you most clearly. The motorcycle's engine hummed steadily as Chukwuma navigated through the evening traffic of Lagos. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting long straddles across the crowded streets. Around him, the city pulsed with its usual chaos. Danfo buses honking aggressively, street hawkers calling out their wares, the smell of suya grilling on roadside stands, mixing with exhaust fumes and the salt air from the distant Atlantic. This was the Lagos most people knew, loud, relentless, overwhelming. But Chukwuma had learned to find peace within the noise. As he rode, his mind wandered back to Ifeoma's sitting room, to that moment when she had extended her poisoned invitation, her voice dripping with false generosity. He had seen it immediately, the barely contained laughter of her friends, the malicious gleam in her eyes, the way she spoke to him as one might speak to a trained animal performing an amusing trick. They thought he was too simple to understand their game, too grateful for scraps of attention to recognize mockery when it was dressed in formal invitation. Let them think that, he told himself. Let them believe their own stories. After 40 minutes of weaving through traffic, Chukwuma turned onto a quieter street in Surulere, far from the mansions of Victoria Island and Ikoyi, where his employer lived. This was a neighborhood of modest buildings, where families knew each other's names, where the smell of evening meals drifted from open windows, and where life happened at a more human scale. He parked his motorcycle in front of a 3-storied building, its yellow paint faded but clean, and climbed the external staircase to the second floor. His apartment was small, just one room with an attached bathroom, a tiny kitchenette in the corner, and a single window that looked out onto the street below. But it was his. The walls were bare except for a faded calendar and a small wooden cross. A narrow bed stood against a wall, covered with a thin but clean bedspread. A plastic chair and a small table served as his dining area. A wooden wardrobe, old and scarred but sturdy, occupied the corner near the bathroom door. To anyone who might have visited, it would have seemed like exactly what they expected, the modest dwelling of a man of modest means and modest ambitions. But appearances, as Chukwuma knew better than most, could be profoundly deceiving. He locked the door behind him, removed his shoes, those carefully polished shoes that Ifeoma had never once complimented, and placed them neatly by the entrance. Then he stood for a moment in the center of the room, letting the silence settle around him like a blanket. This was his sanctuary, the one place where he didn't have to perform invisibility, where he could simply be. After a few moments, he walked to the wardrobe and opened it. Inside hung his work clothes, 3 identical white shirts, 2 pairs of dark trousers, all pressed and ready. But his hand moved past these to the bottom of the wardrobe, where a worn wooden box sat pushed against the back wall, partially hidden behind his spare shoes. The box was old, its corners reinforced with strips of metal that had begun to rust, its surface scratched and dented from years of careful storage. Chukwuma lifted the box and carried it to his bed. He sat down, the thin mattress creaking slightly under his weight, and for a long moment he simply looked at the box without opening it. His fingers traced the scratches on its surface, each mark a memory, each dent a chapter of a life he had set aside but never forgotten. Finally, he lifted the lid. Inside, carefully wrapped in old newspaper and faded cloth, were the fragments of another life. His hands moved slowly, reverently, as he removed each item. First came the photographs, their edges yellowed with age, but their images still clear. In the first photograph, a younger Chukwuma stood on a stage, wearing an elegant 3-piece suit of deep navy blue, his posture confident, his smile genuine. Behind him, slightly out of focus, was a banner that read, Lagos Business Excellence Award 2015. In his hands, he held a crystal trophy that caught the camera's flash, making it gleam like captured lightning. The second photograph showed him at a conference table, surrounded by men and women in expensive business attire, all leaning forward to hear what he was saying. His younger self looked animated, gesturing with his hands, clearly in the middle of explaining something important. The nameplate in front of him read, Chukwuma Obi, Chief Operations Officer. The third photograph was more personal. Chukwuma standing beside a beautiful woman in an elegant gown, both of them smiling at a charity gala.
The woman wore a diamond necklace that sparkled under the ballroom lights, and Chukwuma's arm was around her waist with easy familiarity. They looked like what they were: successful, confident, part of a world that valued achievement and rewarded ambition. Chukwuma set the photos aside gently and reached deeper into the box. His fingers found what they were seeking: a piece of clothing wrapped in protective plastic. He lifted it out carefully, removed the plastic covering, and let the fabric unfold. It was a suit. Not just any suit, but a masterpiece of tailoring, a three-piece ensemble in charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that caught the light. The material was fine wool, the kind that breathed in Lagos heat while maintaining its sharp lines. The waistcoat had been custom-fitted to his frame with mother-of-pearl buttons that gleamed softly. The jacket's shoulders were perfectly structured, the lapels hand-stitched with a precision that spoke of master craftsmanship. Even after years in storage, this suit maintained its dignity, its quality evident in every seam and fold. This suit had cost him a fortune when he bought it, nearly 6 months' salary at the time, but it had been worth every naira. He had worn it to board meetings, to contract signings, to dinners with people whose names appeared in newspapers. In this suit, he had been someone, not invisible, not ignored, not dismissed. A knock on his door interrupted his reverie. Chukwuma carefully folded the suit and returned it to the box before answering. Outside stood his neighbor, Mrs. Adeyemi, a kind woman in her 60s who always checked on him when she heard him arrive home. "Good evening, my son," she greeted warmly. "I cooked okra soup today. I brought you some with eba. You work too hard to be cooking for yourself every night." "Mama, you are too kind," Chukwuma said, accepting the covered bowl gratefully. "Thank you." "That's what neighbors are for," she replied, patting his arm. "Eat while it's still warm. And Chukwuma, you look troubled tonight. Is everything well?" He smiled, the same gentle smile that had unsettled Ifeoma earlier. "Everything is well, Mama. Just thinking about old times." She nodded wisely. Old times have a way of returning when we least expect them. Sometimes that's a blessing, sometimes a lesson. Either way, God knows what He is doing. After she left, Chukwuma ate the meal slowly, savoring the familiar flavors of home-cooked food. Then he pulled out his old phone, not a smartphone like Ifeoma and her friends carried, but a simple device that made calls and received messages. There was one new message from a number he hadn't heard from in months. "Chukwuma, my brother, long time. I heard you are still in Lagos. We should meet. There are people who still remember what you did for this city, people who haven't forgotten. Call me when you can. Your friend, Obinna." Chukwuma stared at the message for a long time. Obinna. They had worked together years ago when Chukwuma's life had followed a very different trajectory, back when his name meant something in Lagos business circles, when his opinion was sought, when his presence commanded rooms. He typed a reply. "Brother, good to hear from you. Much has changed, but perhaps some things are ready to change back. I'll call you soon." After sending the message, he returned to the wooden box and pulled out one more item, a business card, its edges worn but its print still legible. Namaker's Fine Tailoring, where fabric meets excellence, established 1987. Below the name was an address in Yaba and a phone number. Chukwuma had passed Namaker's shop many times over the past 3 years, but had never entered. The old tailor had made several suits for him in the past, back when he could afford such luxuries, back when appearance was part of his professional armor. Tomorrow, he decided, he would visit the shop again, not as a customer seeking new clothing, but as a man asking an old craftsman to restore something precious. That night, as Lagos settled into its restless sleep, Chukwuma lay on his narrow bed, the wooden box resting on the chair beside him. Through his window, he could hear the sounds of the neighborhood. A baby crying, someone's television playing Nollywood drama, the distant argument of a couple, the sudden bark of a dog.
These were the sounds of real life, of people living without pretense, without the need to constantly prove their worth through display and performance. He thought about Ifeoma's party, now just 2 weeks away. He imagined the scene she had choreographed in her mind, him, awkward and out of place, fumbling with unfamiliar cutlery, unable to participate in conversations about business and high society, a source of amusement for her guests. She had invited him to be a clown, an object lesson in the vast distance between her world and his. But what she didn't know,
what none of them knew, was that he had once belonged to that world. Not on its fringes, not as a service provider or a hopeful outsider, but as a full participant. He had sat in those same rooms, shaken those same hands, discussed those same topics. He had been one of them, perhaps more authentically than many who now pretended superiority. But life, as it often does, had other plans. A business partnership that collapsed, an investment that failed spectacularly, a romantic relationship that ended badly, taking his social connections with him. Within 6 months, his carefully constructed life had unraveled. Pride had kept him from begging for help from former colleagues who had quickly forgotten his name. Necessity had driven him to accept whatever work he could find, and dignity, that quiet, stubborn dignity, had kept him silent about who he had been, choosing instead to simply be who he was. Now, 3 years later, Ifeoma had handed him something she didn't realize she was giving, an opportunity. Not for revenge, though the temptation whispered at the edges of his thoughts, but for something more powerful: restoration. A chance to remind himself, and perhaps others, that worth is not determined by current circumstances, that dignity cannot be taken away by mockery, and that the man you dismiss today might be the man who taught you everything you think you know about grace tomorrow. As sleep finally began to pull him under, Chukwuma smiled into the darkness. In 2 weeks, Ifeoma would get exactly what she had invited him for: entertainment. But not the kind she expected. Not the comedy of his discomfort, but the drama of her miscalculation. Not the spectacle of his inadequacy, but the revelation of her blindness. The invitation had been extended as a joke. It would be accepted as an opportunity. And when the day arrived, when he walked into that mansion wearing not his driver's clothes, but the armor of his past dignity, when he spoke not as a servant but as an equal, when the truth emerged from the shadows where it had patiently waited, oh, that would be a party worth attending indeed. The morning after receiving the invitation, Chukwuma awoke before dawn, not because he had to, but because sleep had become impossible. The wooden box sat on his table, still open, the photographs catching the first pale light that filtered through his window. He had spent half the night looking at them, remembering not just what he had been, but who he had been. The confidence, the purpose, the sense of belonging to a world that valued what he could contribute. After a simple breakfast of bread and tea, he wrapped his 3-piece suit carefully in brown paper and tied it with string. Then he mounted his motorcycle and headed toward Yaba, navigating the morning traffic with the same patient skill he brought to everything. The city was just waking up, traders setting up their stalls, buses beginning their routes, the smell of akara frying in roadside pans mixing with the exhaust fumes and morning mist. Nnameka's fine tailoring occupied a narrow space between a phone repair shop and a fabric store. The sign above the door had faded over the years, but the shop itself remained exactly as Chukwuma remembered. A small space filled with the hum of sewing machines, the scent of pressed fabric, and walls decorated with photographs of satisfied customers wearing Nnameka's creations. An old man sat at a worn wooden cable near the window, his glasses perched on his nose, his hands moving with practiced precision as he hemmed a pair of trousers. When the door chimed, announcing Chukwuma's entrance, he looked up. For a moment, his face showed no recognition,
Then his eyes widened. Chukuma, Chukuma Obi. The old tailor stood slowly, his joints protesting the movement. My boy, is it really you? Yes, Baba Nameka, it's me. The old man moved around the table and embraced Chukuma warmly, the way a father might greet a lost son. It's been 3 years, more than 3 years. Where have you been? I heard about what happened with your business, with everything. Some people said you left Lagos, others said worse things. But I always told them, Chukuma is a strong boy. He will survive. And here you are. Chukuma smiled, touched by the genuine warmth in the old man's voice. In a city where relationships were often transactional, where people remembered you as long as you were useful, Nnameka's affection felt like clean water after a long drought. I'm here, Baba, working, living quietly, learning lessons that expensive universities never taught me. Nnameka studied him carefully, his tailor's eye noting every change in his body from 3 years ago, but his expression held no judgment, only understanding. And now, what brings you to my humble shop after all this time? Chukuma placed the wrapped bundle on the table. I need your help, Baba. There's a party in 2 weeks, an important party, and I need to look like... He paused, searching for the right words. Like who I used to be, like who I still am underneath. Nnameka unwrapped the package carefully, his hands reverent as the charcoal gray suit emerged from the brown paper. He held up the jacket, examining the fabric, the stitching, the construction. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. Ah, I remember this suit. 2015. You came to me after receiving that business award. You said, Baba, I need a suit that says I belong here, that I've earned my place. And we created this together. It took me 6 weeks to get every detail perfect. He ran his fingers along the lapel. The fabric is still excellent. The structure is still sound. But yes, it will need adjustments. You've lost weight, my boy. Too much weight. You are not eating enough. I eat enough, Baba. Just not the 7-course meals I used to have. Nnameka laid out the suit carefully on his work table and pulled out his measuring tape. As he took Chukuma's measurement, noting every change in his body from 3 years ago, he spoke quietly. Chukuma, why this party? Why now? What are you trying to prove, and to whom? It was the question Chukuma had been asking himself for days. I'm not trying to prove anything, Baba, but I was invited to be laughed at, to be humiliated. The woman I work for, she sees me as entertainment. She doesn't know who I was. She's never asked. To her, I'm just a driver, a servant, someone beneath her notice except when she needs to feel superior. And you want to show her she's wrong? No. Chukuma's voice was firm. I want to show myself that I was right. Right to choose dignity over bitterness. Right to work honestly instead of scheming. Right to believe that character matters more than circumstances. This party, it's not about revenge. It's about remembering who I am, regardless of where life has placed me. Nnameka nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his old eyes. Then this suit will be perfect. Come back in 1 week. I'll have it ready, not just repaired, but renewed. You'll walk into that party looking like the man you are, not the man they think you are. As Chukuma turned to leave, the old tailor called after him, Chukuma, one more thing. When you walk into that room, remember the suit is just fabric. What makes you stand tall is what you carry inside. Don't let them take that from you again. The days that followed moved with strange speed. Chukuma continued his duties as if nothing had changed. Each morning, he arrived at Ifeoma's mansion precisely at 7:30. Each morning, he waited patiently while she prepared herself for whatever social performance the day demanded. Each morning, he drove her through Lagos traffic, enduring her phone conversations filled with gossip, complaints, and casual cruelty. But something had shifted. Ifeoma noticed it, though she couldn't quite identify what. Chukuma seemed different. Still quiet, still professional, but there was something in his posture, something in the way he held himself that made her vaguely uncomfortable. Once she caught him watching her in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable, and for just a moment she had felt like the one being judged. "What are you looking at?" she snapped. "Nothing, madame, just checking the road behind us." But the feeling lingered, like a splinter beneath the skin, small, almost unnoticeable, but present. Meanwhile, Ifeoma's party preparations had reached a fever pitch. Every day brought new deliveries, flowers, decorations, furniture rentals, catering samples. Ifeoma's mansion transformed into a command center of controlled chaos, with workers streaming in and out, each carrying pieces of the elaborate performance she was orchestrating. The guest list had been finalized at exactly 150, carefully curated to include everyone whose presence would enhance her social standing and exclude everyone who might diminish it. 3 days before the party, Adaize and Amara came for their final planning session. They sat in Ifeoma's lavish sitting room, sipping champagne and reviewing every detail. "Tell me you haven't forgotten our main entertainment," Amara asked, her eyes glinting with anticipation. Ifeoma laughed. "How could I forget? I reminded Chukwuma again yesterday. I even told him to dress his best because there would be important
People there. He actually thanked me. Can you believe it? He still thinks I'm doing him a favor." "This is going to be legendary," Adaize said, raising her glass. "A toast to the most memorable birthday party Lagos has ever seen." Their glasses clinked together, the sound sharp and brittle in the expensive room. 1 week after his visit to Unemika's shop, Chukwuma returned to collect his suit. The old tailor greeted him with a smile that suggested he had created something special. From a back room, he brought out the suit, now wrapped in clean white fabric, and laid it carefully on the table. "Before you look," Nemika said, "I want you to know, I didn't just alter the suit, I renewed it. I hand-pressed every seam, I reinforced the shoulders, I polished the buttons until they gleamed. I treated the fabric with care usually reserved for wedding garments. This suit is ready for whatever that party brings." When Chukwuma unwrapped the suit, he was momentarily speechless. It looked new, better than new. Every line was crisp, every detail perfect. The charcoal gray seemed to have deepened, the subtle pinstripes more defined. When he tried it on in Enemika's small fitting room, the transformation was complete. The jacket settled on his shoulders like it had never left. The waistcoat fit perfectly, accentuating his lean frame rather than revealing his weight loss. The trousers broke at exactly the right length above his newly polished shoes. When he stepped out of the fitting room, Enemika's eyes misted slightly. There he is. There's the Chukwuma Obi I remember. The one who walked into boardrooms like he owned them. The one who spoke and people listened. "How much do I owe you, Baba?" Enemika waved his hand dismissively. "Nothing. This was my honor. Just promise me one thing. When you walk into that party, walk with your head high. Not with pride, but with dignity. Show them that a man's worth isn't determined by his current job, but by his character." Chukwuma embraced Nemika. "Thank you, Baba, for everything." "One more thing," Nemika said, reaching into a drawer. He pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a pair of silver cufflinks, elegant but not ostentatious. "These were my father's. He was a tailor too, but before that, he was a teacher. He taught me that how you present yourself to the world matters, not because you need to impress others, but because you need to respect yourself. Wear these, honor his memory and your own dignity." The night before the party, Chukwuma sat in his small apartment, the suit hanging carefully on the back of his door, the cufflinks resting in their box on his table. He had also retrieved something else from his wooden box, a slim leather wallet that contained not money, but business cards. Old business cards from his previous life, yellowed now, but still legible. His phone buzzed. A message from Obina. "Brother,
I heard from someone that you are attending Ifeoma Okafor's party tomorrow. Is this true? That woman is notorious in business circles. Be careful. But also, if you're ready to come back, there are people who would welcome you. People who remember what you contributed. Call me after the party. We should talk seriously. Chukwuma stared at the message for a long time. The past 3 years had been about survival, about learning humility, about discovering that he could endure more than he thought possible. But perhaps they had also been about preparation, preparing him for a return that would be different from his first arrival. Not as a young man desperate to prove himself, but a mature one who understood both the value and the limitations of worldly success. He typed a reply. Yes, I'll be there. And yes, let's talk after. I think I'm finally ready. That night, Chukwuma slept deeply for the first time in weeks. No anxiety, no rehearsing scenarios, no planning dramatic entrances or cutting remarks. He would simply arrive, be himself, and let the truth unfold naturally. Whatever happened would happen. He had learned in 3 years of invisibility that the most powerful statement you can make is simply refusing to be diminished by others' expectations. The day of the party arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, a gentle breeze that carried the scent of the Atlantic, and that golden afternoon light that made Lagos look almost beautiful. At Ifeoma's mansion, the transformation was complete. White tents had been erected in the garden, their fabric billowing gently. Tables were arranged in elegant clusters, each covered with pristine white tablecloths and decorated with elaborate flower arrangements. A stage had been built for live music, and a dance floor had been laid down near the pool. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved through the space, making final preparations, while the catering team set up their stations with military precision. Inside the mansion, Ifeoma stood before her full-length mirror, examining herself with the critical eye of a general inspecting troops before battle. Her dress was a masterpiece, a floor-length gown in deep burgundy, custom-made by a designer who usually dressed Nollywood stars. Her jewelry, diamonds at her throat, wrists and ears caught the light with every movement. Her hair had been styled into an elaborate updo that had taken 3 hours to complete. Her makeup was flawless, applied by a professional artist who charged more for one session than Chukwuma earned in a month. She looked by any objective measure stunning. But as she stared at her reflection, that small splinter of discomfort that had been bothering her for days pulsed again. Something felt off, though she couldn't identify what. She shook her head, dismissing the feeling. Tonight was her night, her moment of triumph. Everything would be perfect. "Madame," her housekeeper called from the doorway, "the first guests are beginning to arrive." Ifeoma took a deep breath, arranged her face into its most gracious smile, and descended the stairs to greet her kingdom. By 6 p.m., the party was in full swing. The garden buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the gentle sounds of the live music playing contemporary Nigerian music with just enough sophistication to please the educated crowd. The guests represented a cross-section of Lagos's elite, business owners, politicians, media personalities, and the professionally wealthy whose primary occupation was attending events exactly like this one. Ifeoma moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting compliments about her dress, her home, her exquisite taste. Adaeze and Amara flanked her, their laughter punctuating every conversation like musical accompaniment. The food was being praised, the decorations admired, the entire event deemed a tremendous success. "But where is our special guest?" Amara whispered to Ifeoma during a lull in the social performance. "Your driver, has he arrived?" Ifeoma glanced toward the gate, a predatory smile crossing her lips. "Not yet, but oh, when he does, I've instructed the security to let me know immediately. I want to be there to personally welcome him. I want to see his face when he realizes he's way in over his head." As if by cue, one of the security guards approached discreetly. "Madam, there's a man at the gate. He says he was invited. Name is Chukwuma Obi?" "Obi?" Ifeoma frowned. He's just Chukuma. I didn't know he even had a surname." She turned to her friends with barely contained glee. "Ladies, our entertainment has arrived. Come, let's go greet him. This should be delicious." The three women made their way toward the entrance, already giggling in anticipation. Other guests, noticing their movement and sensing something interesting was about to happen, began drifting in the same direction. Within moments, a small crowd had gathered near the gate, curiosity pulling them like gravity. "Let him in," Ifeoma commanded the security guard, "and everyone, please, give our special guest a proper welcome." The gate swung open, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then a figure stepped through, and the entire garden seemed to fall silent. The man who entered was not the Chukuma they expected. He wore a three-piece suit of charcoal gray that fit him like it had been painted on his body. The fabric caught the evening light, the subtle pinstripes creating an effect of sophisticated elegance. His white shirt was crisp, his burgundy tie perfectly knotted. Silver cufflinks gleamed at his wrists. His shoes, expensive leather Oxfords, not the simple footwear of a driver, were polished to a mirror shine. His posture was straight, his shoulders back, his head held at exactly the right angle, not arrogant, but absolutely confident. But it wasn't just the clothes, it was the way he wore them, the way he moved, the way he carried himself into that space as if he belonged there, as if the past 3 years of invisibility had been merely a costume he could remove at will. Ifeoma's smile froze on her face. Around her, the whispered laughter died. Someone in the crowd gasped softly.
Chukuma walked forward calmly, his eyes scanning the crowd with quiet assessment. When his gaze reached Ifeoma, he smiled, that same small smile that had unsettled her weeks ago, but now magnified by context, by presentation, by the complete inversion of her expectations. "Good evening, Madame Ifeoma," he said, his voice clear and cultured. "Thank you for the invitation. Your home looks beautiful this evening." Ifeoma opened her mouth, but no words came out. Adaeze and Amara stood frozen beside her, their carefully planned mockery evaporating in the face of this impossibility. Then, from the crowd, a voice called out. A man's voice, surprised and delighted. "Chukuma? Chukuma Ubi? Is that really you?" An older man pushed through the crowd, Chief Emmanuel Okonkwo, one of Lagos's most respected business magnates, a man whose name appeared regularly in financial newspapers, whose opinion could make or break careers. He walked straight to Chukuma and embraced him warmly, ignoring the stunned silence around them. "My boy, where have you been? We've been looking for you. After what happened with your company, you disappeared. Do you know how many times I tried to reach you? How many of us wanted to help but couldn't find you?" Chukuma returned the embrace respectfully. "Chief Okonkwo-sir, I apologize for vanishing. I needed time to figure out who I was without the company, without the status, time to rebuild from the ground up." "Rebuild?" Chief Okonkwo stepped back, looking Chukuma up and down with an approving eye. "My boy, you don't need to rebuild. What you built the first time is still standing. Your ideas, your systems, your innovations, half the tech companies in Lagos are still using them. The problem was your business partner, not you. Everyone knew that. You took the fall for someone else's greed." The crowd was now completely silent, every ear straining to hear this conversation. Ifeoma felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, felt the carefully constructed narrative of the evening collapsing like a house built on sand. Another voice joined the conversation, this time a woman's, cultured and warm. "Chukuma Obi! Oh my goodness, it is you!" Mrs. Folashade Williams, a prominent lawyer and socialite, approached with genuine warmth. "I was just talking about you last week. We were discussing the Youth Empowerment Initiative you founded. Do you know it's still running? Your volunteers kept it alive even after you had to step down. Over 500 young people have been trained and employed through your program."
More voices now, more people recognizing him, pushing forward with greetings, questions, and expressions of genuine respect. It was like watching a dam break, the flood of recognition, of remembered connections, of suppressed truth finally released. Chukwuma, you revolutionized supply chain management in Lagos. Your logistics system is still being studied in business schools. Do you remember the charity auction in 2014? You raised 50 million naira for that orphanage. Your article on ethical business practices was brilliant. I still recommend it to my students. Ifeoma stood forgotten at the edge of the crowd, her carefully planned humiliation transforming into her own public exposure. Around her, guests were whispering now, putting pieces together, realizing the truth. Wait, is this the same Chukwuma who... Yes, Chukwuma Obi. He was one of the youngest business leaders in Lagos. I heard he lost everything when his partner embezzled millions. He took responsibility rather than throw his partner under the bus. That's integrity. And Ifeoma, she didn't know? Her own driver was... How could she not know? How could she not even ask? Adaeze grabbed Ifeoma's arm, her voice panicked and low. Did you know this? Did you have any idea who he was? Ifeoma couldn't answer. Her mind was spinning, reviewing every interaction with Chukwuma, every dismissive word, every casual cruelty, every moment she had treated him as less than human. And now, surrounded by people who clearly respected him, who remembered his contributions, who were treating him like the guest of honor at her own party, she understood. She had invited him to humiliate him, and instead, she had created the stage for her own undoing. Chukwuma, at the center of the growing crowd, remained gracious. He answered questions humbly, deflected excessive praise, and spoke about his time away from the spotlight as necessary growth rather than punishment or failure. Finally, Chief Okonkwo put his arm around Chukwuma and addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who don't know, let me tell you about this young man. 3 years ago, Chukwuma Obi was one of the brightest minds in Lagos business. He built a logistics company from nothing, literally from a laptop in his small apartment, to a multi-million naira operation that serviced half the major businesses in this city. When his business partner betrayed him, embezzled millions and disappeared, Chukwuma could have walked away. Instead, he took responsibility. He sold everything he owned to pay back investors. He worked personally to ensure every employee got their severance. He chose honor over self-preservation. The chief paused, looking around at the assembled guests. Madam, I don't know how this man came to be in your employ or under what circumstances, but I hope you realized what a blessing it was to have someone of his caliber and integrity in your life. Many of us would hire him in a heartbeat, not as a driver, but as a leader, a consultant, a partner. Ifeoma felt every eye in the garden turn towards her. Her face burned with humiliation, the very emotion she intended for Chukwuma now boomeranging back to her with devastating force. She wanted to speak, to explain, to somehow salvage the situation, but words failed her completely. Chukwuma, sensing her distress despite everything she had done, stepped forward gently. Chief Okonkwo, with respect, Madam Ifeoma gave me employment when I needed it. She gave me work when others might have turned me away. For that, I'm grateful. My time as her driver taught me valuable lessons about humility, about seeing the world from different perspectives, about understanding that every job has dignity if you bring dignity to it. His words were gracious, but everyone present understood the subtext. He was being kind, but his kindness only made Ifeoma's cruelty more apparent by contrast. She had employed him, yes, but she had never asked his name, never inquired about his story, never treated him with even basic human respect. The party continued, but its nature had completely transformed. What had been Ifeoma's celebration had become Chukwuma's unexpected reunion. Groups formed around him, people eager to reconnect, to offer opportunities, to hear about his plans. Business cards were exchanged, phone numbers were taken, invitations were extended to lunch meetings, board consultations, investment discussions. Ifeoma retreated to a corner of her own party, Adaeze and Amara flanking her like defeated generals after a lost battle. They watched as their intended victim became the evening's most celebrated guest, as their cruel joke transformed into a demonstration of their own shallow judgment. "We didn't know," Amara whispered weakly. "How are we supposed to know?" But Adaeze, perhaps the most perceptive of the three, shook her head slowly. "We could have known. We could have asked. We chose not to. We chose to see only a driver, to make assumptions based on his current circumstances, rather than asking about his full story. This isn't about not knowing. This is about not caring to know." Her words hung in the air, uncomfortable and undeniable. Later in the evening, as the party began to wind down, Chukwuma found a quiet moment on the terrace overlooking the garden. Chief Okonkwo joined him, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "You handled that with remarkable grace," the chief said, handing Chukwuma a glass. "Many men would use that moment for revenge, for humiliation, for payback, but you chose dignity instead." Chukwuma sipped the wine slowly. "Revenge would have made me feel powerful for a moment, but empty afterwards. I didn't come here to destroy anyone, Chief. I came to remind myself that my worth isn't determined by how others see me. Tonight proved that. The people who matter, who truly matter, they remembered. They saw past my current circumstances to who I actually am. That's enough." "Then what's next for you? Are you ready to come back?" Chukwuma looked out over the city lights spreading endlessly before them. "I think so, but differently this time. I've learned things in the past 3 years that no business school could teach, about empathy, about perspective, about the people who are overlooked, dismissed, treated as invisible. When I build again, and I will build again, it will be for a bigger purpose than just my own success." Chief Okonkwo nodded approvingly. "Then you're ready. Come to my office Monday morning. I have a proposal for you. Several of us have been discussing a new initiative, something that combines business with social impact. We've been looking for someone to lead it, someone with business acumen, yes, but also with character and perspective. After tonight, I'm certain you're that person." As the 2 men
shook hands, sealing an unspoken agreement, Ifeoma watched from inside her mansion. She stood at the window, isolated in her own home, surrounded by the remnants of a party that had become her education rather than her triumph. Her housekeeper approached softly. "Madam, the DJ is asking if they should continue playing music or if the party is ending." Ifeoma didn't answer immediately. She continued staring at Chukwuma on the terrace. This man she had dismissed for years, this person she had invited to mock, this human being she had never bothered to truly see. And now she understood. The problem was never Chukwuma's inadequacy. It was always her own blindness. She said, "Tell them the party is over. It's been over for longer than I realized." 6 months later, Chukwuma stood in a new office building in Victoria Island. The sign outside read, "Obi Innovations and Social Impact," a consulting firm that combined business strategy with community development. Chief Okonkwo had invested in it. Several of Chukwuma's old colleagues had joined him, and the waiting list of clients wanting his services grew longer each week. But the most important work happened in the community programs they funded: youth training initiatives, small business incubators, scholarship programs for children of drivers, cleaners, and security guards, the people others overlooked, the invisible ones. One afternoon, Chukwuma's secretary informed him he had an unexpected visitor. When he looked up, he was surprised to see Ifeoma standing in his doorway. She looked different, smaller somehow, less certain, humbler. "Madam Ifeoma," he said, standing, "this is unexpected." She entered slowly, her expensive handbag held in front of her like a shield. I came to apologize,"
properly apologize. Not because people are watching or because I need to save face, but because it's been eating at me for months. What I did to you, how I treated you for 3 years, it was unforgivable. Chukwuma gestured to a chair. Please sit. They sat across from each other, the power dynamic completely invited from their previous relationship. But Chukwuma's expression held no triumph, but only quiet attention. I've done a lot of thinking since that night, Ifeoma continued, about why I treated you that way, about what it says about me. I realized I was so focused on status, on appearing superior, on surrounding myself with people who made me feel powerful, that I lost sight of basic humanity. I looked at you and saw only a role, driver, servant, someone beneath me. I never saw a person with a story, with dignity, with worth beyond what service you could provide. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. I learnt a very public, very painful lesson that night, but it was a lesson I needed. Since then, I've been trying to do better. I ask people about their lives now. I learn their full names. I try to see them as individuals rather than functions. It's harder than it sounds. I have to fight against habits I've built over decades, but I'm trying. Chukwuma listened quietly, then nodded. Thank you for telling me this, and thank you for the work you gave me, even if the respect didn't come with it. That job, difficult as it was emotionally, taught me things I needed to learn. About patience, about humility, about finding dignity in any circumstance. In a strange way, we taught each other lessons. Mine just happened to be more public. Ifeoma smiled weakly. That's gracious of you to say. More gracious than I deserve. She stood to leave, then turned back. One more thing. I saw on the news that your company is starting a scholarship program for children of service workers. I'd like to contribute, not for publicity, not to ease my conscience, but because it's right, because those children deserve the same opportunities as anyone else. That would be welcome. Thank you. After she left, Chukwuma stood at his office window, looking out over Lagos. The city sprawled endlessly before him, filled with millions of stories, some being told, most remaining silent, all deserving to be heard. His phone buzzed. A message from Obina. Congratulations on the new government contract. I told you they would remember your work. Welcome back, brother. But as Chukwuma looked out over the city, he realized something important. He hadn't come back at all. He had simply continued forward, carrying everything he'd learned from both his success and from his time of being overlooked into a future that valued not just achievement, but also empathy, not just wealth, but wisdom, not just power, but purpose. The story that began with mockery ended with revelation. The invitation extended as a joke had become a doorway to transformation, not just for Chukwuma, but for everyone who witnessed what happened when assumptions meet truth, when cruelty encounters grace, and when the invisible man finally steps into the light.